Hey, welcome to another episode of my videocast series. It's basically an Ask Me Anything series. I'm doing this for my campaign for U.S. Congress in Kansas's 3rd District. I'm running against the current Congressman Kevin Yoder in the Republican primaries. So I'm using this opportunity to kind of talk about relevant events and, answer the questions that you have about my political stances and who I am. So today, what I'm focused on, the question that I'm answering, is in regards to mass shootings, and specifically, how can we reduce the number of mass shootings? Is there anything we can do? Why has there been a rise in mass shootings in America? And it's a pretty big, beefy topic, so it's not going to be a quick video, but it is a very good question to kind of examine, because I think we as a society and as a political society seem to think there's always an answer to any problem that ails us, and we can do that through government. And unfortunately, this is one of those situations where I kind of have to go against the general opinion of many that the government can do something to stop these things. So let me get right into it. If you actually look at homicide statistics today, we are at an all-time low in America. Violent crime has never been lower, and that's a very important stat to note. So when we start talking about mass shootings, we start thinking that, oh man, the world has become this super violent place, when in reality, the day-to-day basis, you are less likely to be shot or killed by another person than any time in history. I mean, you can walk outside and go to the grocery store and, never see a person with a gun, let alone somebody who would want to do you harm. So I think that's a very important thing for us to keep in mind, because with social media and everything else today and the 24-hour news cycle, it makes it seem as though we're living in a very terrible, violent place, and it's really just not the day-to-day experience that the vast majority of Americans have. So beyond that, when we start talking about mass shootings, we also need to be careful about how we're defining terms. So it's always very telling when you go to a website or read an article about mass shootings in general, and when you look at the statistics of what they use. If it's more than 100 mass shootings a year, they're using bogus statistics. And I really shouldn't say bogus. They're being dishonest with how they are defining the term. So when you see those large numbers, most of those mass shootings that are recorded are simply more than 4 people being involved in a shooting. Now, at first you're like, well, okay, hold on, that seems like quite a bit of people being involved in a shooting. That I would count that. But then you also have to assume that most of the statistics that are counted for that are actually gang shootings. So there's a lot of gang violence in our inner cities all over America. And despite that amount of gang violence, we are still at a lower homicide rate than we've ever been. So when we're looking at this, we want to really be careful about how we're defining terms. When I talk about mass shootings, I'm talking about single shooter events going into areas of unarmed people and simply, pulling the trigger as many times as they can and hitting as many people as they can. That is very different from what the FBI records as a mass shooting of more than 4 people. So when I'm addressing this particular issue, I'm speaking to that, of single shooter events. And that is something that, while it has a lot of coverage, isn't drastic and drastically large in number. There haven't been tons and tons of these. There's not one every week. Let's put it that way. And that's what the statistics that several people would use to try and say that we're having an epidemic of mass shootings. So now that that's out of the way, to really address the meat of the question, well, what can we do to prevent these? Me personally, I don't think there's anything that the government can do to stop mass shootings from happening, unless we turn into a complete militaristic state, fascist state, where we are watching absolutely everything you are doing 24/7, and can put in some sort of measures to prevent you from actually committing acts of this nature. The fact of the matter is there's 360 million people or 300 million people in this country, and there's no way the government could keep tabs on all of us. And when we look at the people who generally are committing these acts of terror, these mass shootings or mass casualty events, they're going to commit those terrible acts with whatever they can get a hold of. So, mixing ammonia and bleach releases a cloud of chlorine gas. You put that in a ventilation system in an office building, and you start mixing as much of that as you can kill a lot of people, at least make them very, very sick. It's not hard to manufacture explosives with household chemicals. It's not very hard to, in general, kill people in large numbers. We've seen people take trucks and vans through crowds of people, so on and so forth. The point is, these people are going to find an end to their means one way or another. It just so happens that they're able to grab a gun and go do it instead of having to be a little bit more creative. We've seen it with the Boston bombings at the Boston Marathon. Again, there's an endless number of ways to cause mass terror and mass casualty events. You do not need a firearm to do it. And simply removing firearms isn't going to stop these things from occurring. So what we really have to do as a society, and not necessarily as a government, if government wants to do some research into this, I'm fine with that. But what we have to do as a society is take a look at the cause. Why would an individual want to commit such an act? Because I think everyone can pretty much agree it's a very heinous and evil act, and it takes a very evil or deranged person to commit such an act. So we need to look at the cause, and what is it that is suddenly causing young men, and it's mostly young men, to essentially go in and do something that's against human programming. Again, we're very social creatures, we're very communal creatures, that's how we've evolved over time. And this goes against and bucks a trend of all of our hardware, so to speak, our evolutionary hardware. So that kind of makes us, we kind of have to take a look at our culture. What is it about America today that would cause individuals to do this? Well, there's a lot of things. There's an overprescription of SSRI medications and antipsychotics. Antipsychotic medication is very important, and I'm not saying that we should in any way, shape, or form ban the use or put a negative stigma on anti-psych meds. But they are overprescribed. They're prescribed for anything from, hey, I kind of feel sad, to, hey, I'm seeing things. And that overprescription of SSRI medication has been involved in a lot of these mass shootings or mass casualty events. I think we really have to kind of take a look at what is it about our society in the last 10, 20 years, which is kind of where we've seen this rash of this outbreak, so to speak, start to occur. Well, you can start looking at things like the 24-hour news cycle and how the 24-hour news cycle follows you everywhere you go today. Human beings are very, again, we've evolved to be social creatures, but we're only really able to handle a certain amount of bad information in a given time period, so to speak. And when you can carry in your pocket bad information with you everywhere you go, and that is constantly being reinforced by Facebook's algorithms, so that you're constantly getting the same information over and over and over again, it can really insulate you from other things that would put those events in context. And instead, you kind of get this siloing effect where you go further and further down this hole with no real, lateral way to kind of get yourself out of this rut. So we also have an education system that in general does not serve males well. You can look at graduation statistics, you can look at pass-fail rates, you can look at attendance rates. Overall, men are underserved by our education system. So you have a large number of young men graduating high school with no career prospects, or they're graduating college in this high-pressure situation, and they have no social support, or their social support structure ends up being social media, which is can lead one to a psychotic state, so to speak. So there's a lot of things going on in our society today especially in the last 20 years, that are starting, I can only assume, have an effect on someone's capability and their desire to commit an act like this. And until we can figure that out, until we can get to that root cause and we can fix these other issues, I don't think we're ever going to necessarily be able to stop acts of terrorism. And you know, this really does kind of it's not an answer people want to hear. They want to know that there's a solution to something and that it's easy and it can be fixed right now. But in all honesty, I do not see that being the case. We have very, very deep societal issues in this regard. And, you know, America is not the only place. The whole world is trying to figure out how to deal with this new cultural software that we're downloading. If you kind of think of the human machine, the mind and the brain and all that as the hardware, well, our society is the software. And right now it seems like our software or our culture is sick. And we need to get to the bottom of that sickness, because I believe that this outbreak of mass shootings and casualty events, this terrorism, is a symptom. It's a telling symptom. It's a warning sign to let us know that something's not operating well within our society. So I hope that answers your question. I know that was a long rant there, but yeah. So that's it for this episode, and I'll catch you later.